In this lesson, we're going to learn about HTML tables. These were originally designed for representing tables of data in web pages. They then became kind of the standard way of formatting the structure of pages, where you would have navigation bars on the side or on the top, main content areas, and so on. That's fallen a little out of favor with the people who are really adherent to the web guidelines, which now suggest you should do that with style sheets. And there are definite advantages to doing it with style sheets, but as a beginner who will not get deep into the world of CSS, tables are likely going to be a good way for you to format your document. And there's kind of a gray area in the middle where some people who are, again, really adherent to the guidelines might say that you should use style sheets. Other people would definitely use tables, and it's kind of a call on your part about which way to use them. So in this lecture, I'm just going to teach you the basics of tables, and then we'll do a couple example pages to show different ways that they can be used. So a table basically lets you make a set of rows and columns for your page that you can put content in. That's the basic idea of a table. So we start with the table tag and the end table tag. And one note that I'll put in here is that tables are deeply unforgiving. If you forget an end tag, everything will break, your page will be completely blank. So it's important to pay close attention to making sure all of the tags in here are opened and closed correctly. So you have a start table tag and an end table tag. That indicates that everything inside here is going to be in a table. Tables are then broken down into rows, and the rows are broken down into cells. You can't have anything in your table outside of a cell, and you can't have a cell outside of a row. So we have our table tag, and then we start a table row, and then we'll end that row. This is the most common tag people forget is to end their table rows. So you have a table, and then the next thing that comes must be a table row. You can't have anything else. You couldn't put text here. That wouldn't work. Everything would be messed up. So you have your table row, and then inside the row, you actually have the cells. Remember, these were designed for encoding data. So you have the TD tag for the cell, which stands for table data. Let's just label these now. I'll put another one here. And so we have our row. It has two cells. Our row ends, our table ends. Make sure that all of your cells, your TD tags are closed, your TR is closed, your table is closed. This isn't going to look too impressive yet. So if we reload it, there we have cell 1 and cell 2 next to each other. It doesn't look too different. So we're going to make this a little more complicated. The first thing we're going to do is add border equals 1 to our table. That's going to outline our cells for us so we can see what's going on. So if we reload with that, now you can see that we have two cells there. By the way, it's common for people learning HTML and people in the 1990s to keep these borders on the tables, but it's really outdated looking. So I'm going to leave it here in these examples so we can see what's going on, but I strongly discourage you from putting borders on your tables on your web pages because you're going to look like you're making a page from 1994. Okay, so we have one table row. The rows are independent, so we have our first row, and then after that we can put a second row. And I'm going to make our formatting a little bit nicer. This indentation isn't necessary, and it doesn't have any functional benefit. It just makes it a little bit clearer to see what's going on. So we'll call these second ones row 2, 1, for row 2, column 1, and row 2, column 2. And then end that row. And now we see we can get this, this kind of grid coming up. You can put as many cells as you want and as many rows as you want. The one caveat is that you have to have the same number of cells per row. Otherwise things look weird. It's not correct. So if we put a cell 3 in our first row and didn't put one in our second row, it would look like this. That's weird. It's not okay. You shouldn't do it. So make sure you have the same number of cells in each row. But there are ways that you can adjust this. So for example, maybe we would want cell 3 to go across to kind of fill up this whole space here. We can do that, and we do that with an attribute called row span. How many rows should this cell span? A cell will always go down. So here we have our first row. We're going to add our row span equals 2, which means this cell should cover 2 rows, so it will go down into the second row. If we reload that, now our cell 3 fills up both rows. That's pretty cool. If we were to make that 3, everything would get weird because we don't actually have a third row. You have no idea what's going to happen, so make sure you don't do that. So that's row span, and that gives us this appearance. Now, if we get rid of that, and I'm going to stick that in a little comment here so you guys can see it later. And we go back to our not so good thing. Maybe we want row 2-2 to actually spread out so it covers that third spot. We can do that in row 2-2, that cell. We're going to add col span. So we did row span up here. How many rows high should this be? Here we're going to do col span. How many columns wide should this be? If you add that, the cell will always stretch to the right. So you take the cell, put it in its leftmost position, and then add the col span. So we say this is going to be 2 columns wide. So basically this cell is going to be the equivalent of 2. And if we do that, now you can see this spreads out. Another thing to notice here is that the cells are kind of variable width and height. They basically just fit the widest content. So cell 1, there's some white space here. That's just because this column is spreading to make sure it fits all of row 2, 1. Here we have cell 2 and 3. That's the widest thing, and so that's going to dictate the width here. But there's no border around this at all. So there's ways that you can adjust that too. Your columns have to be the same width, and your rows have to be the same height. So we couldn't have this cell be tall and this cell be skinnier. Similarly, these columns are going to line up. The first cell in each row is going to be the same width. So oftentimes in your first row, for each cell, you'll specify something like a width. You specify this in pixels, but you don't add anything to indicate its pixels. That's just by the default. So if I add that to all 3 cells and then reload, now they're each 200 pixels wide. And that dictates everything that comes after. Okay, so that's the basics of tables. If we set border equal to 0, that will get rid of that ugly border. Looks a little bit weird just floating here on the page, but as we will see in future examples, there's reasons that you don't want that border there. So it could be that you're doing something with data where you want it, but generally it looks super dated, so leave it off, and our examples will show us some cases where very clearly it shouldn't be there.